It was the smell of roses that tipped me off first. Roses and hairspray drifting across the pasture on a heavy Texas breeze, definitely not the usual scent on my ranch. From the porch, coffee mug balanced in hand, I finally saw them. Clusters of overdressed strangers stumbling through the tall grass, their high-pitched laughter rolling past the fence line like loose tumbleweed. One woman in stilettos lurched forward and went down flat on her back, and trailing not far behind, two men in tuxedos lugged folding chairs over their heads, like explorers braving the Sahara. At the center of the chaos, observing the intruders like ancient stone statues, stood Duke and Diesel, my 2,000-pound Angus bulls, wearing expressions that could only be described as amused. White satin ribbons fluttered from a freshly built gazebo, little flags of surrender. I sure hadn't installed it. The thing had sprouted up on my land a few days earlier, without a whisper of permission, planted there like some throwback frontier land grab. And no, those delicate ribbons were being mashed into the dirt by 1,200 pounds of beef on the hoof. I leaned against my porch railing and took a slow, steady sip of coffee. People say karma moves at its own pace. Me? I think sometimes it comes charging in, horns first. Name's Robert Garrison. I've owned the Double Oak Ranch for 15 years, 300 acres of prime grazing land. My grandfather left me. One fence line borders Meadow View Estates, a suburban stretch of perfect lawns, plastic smiles, and HOA rulebooks. When I took over the ranch, Meadowview had maybe 20 houses. Now, it's a sprawling sea of vinyl siding and lawn ornaments, governed with an iron clipboard by Karen Peaton. Karen moved in from California 5 years back. Within months, she had wedged herself onto the HOA board. Within a year, she was president. Since then, she's run that neighborhood like a personal fiefdom, measuring grass to the inch, finding residents for the mailbox colors, sending warnings over the wind chime volume. Our first clash happened when she mailed me a certified letter demanding that I repaint my 1952 barn because it was an eyesore. Visible from multiple Meadowview residences, that barn sits a mile from the property line. I framed the letter. Things snowballed from there. She tried convincing the county to shut down my compost piles, filed noise complaints about my roosters, started a petition to rezone my acreage as residential, so she could force out my livestock. The county laughed her clear out of the room, but it told me exactly who I was up against. Then came the gazebo. 3 weeks ago, I noticed a surveyor walking the edges of my land. He said Karen hired him for a community project. I showed him my own survey, and he backed off. A week later, I found Karen herself is standing in my pasture with a clipboard, pink blazer, and ridiculous high-heeled boots. She claimed they needed the space for a wedding, Judge Weatherby's daughter, and that my field was simply perfect for it. I told her to leave. She waved me off, called my bulls cows, and insisted I move them just for one tiny day. I told her no. She left, muttering about people with no sense of community spirit. 4 days later, hammering jolted me awake. I stepped outside to find a full construction crew assembling a fancy gazebo in my east pasture, octagonal, latticework, benches, the kind straight out of a bridal magazine. I confronted the foreman. He handed me a work order signed by Karen on behalf of the HOA. I told him he was trespassing. He looked stunned. Said Karen assured him everything was legal. By the time that the sheriff arrived, and the gazebo was already complete, Deputy Morrison said it was a civil matter. Now, Karen drifted in later that night, 2 HOA board members at her sides, folder in hand and a bright, manufactured smile plastered on her face. She launched into a speech about neighborly cooperation. I gave her a deadline, 48 hours to remove the gazebo or face legal action. She laughed and said, "Surely you wouldn't ruin the young couple's special day over a little misunderstanding." I asked if she'd pulled any permits. Her smile twitched. "It's temporary," she insisted. "The HOA doesn't need permits." I reminded her that she did when constructing anything on someone else's private property. She still wouldn't back down. Her pride was wedged too deeply. The wedding was set in stone, and she assumed I'd fold, afraid of negative attention. I smiled and said, "You're right. It's not complicated." The next morning, I called my attorney, who confirmed I had full rights to use my own land, however I pleased. Then I phoned my insurance agent, who assured me I wouldn't be liable for injuries if trespassers were involved. Last, I called Miguel, my ranch hand. I told him to move the bulls early. Duke and Diesel, they aren't ordinary cattle. They're registered Black Angus, each worth 30 grand. Huge, territorial, and edgy after being cooped up in the holding the paddock for days. I opened the fence on Friday afternoon, posted fresh no trespassing in livestock area, enter at your own risk signs, and waited. Saturday rolled in warm and bright. By noon, guests were strolling onto my land like they already owned the deed. Tables and chairs popped up, a string quartet tuned their instruments, and Karen strutted around in a purple designer dress. The bride arrived at 2. Sweet. Polite. I almost felt bad. Almost. At 2:25, I opened the gate. Duke stepped out first, nostrils quivering. Diesel followed, tail slicing the air. The moment they spotted the crowd, they charged. A violinist dropped her instrument and pointed. Screams erupted. People scattered like quail. One man used a cello as a makeshift pole vault. Elderly ladies hiked up their skirts and sprinted. A photographer kept snapping shots even while running. Diesel discovered the catering table. Duke lowered his head and rammed the gazebo, shaking it straight down to its foundation. Karen froze where she stood, mute and pale. The bride bolted, veil flying behind her. The officiant disappeared. Later, I heard he climbed a tree to hide. 5 minutes later, the pasture was empty except for Duke and Diesel, chewing cud amid the wreckage. Diesel wore a wedding veil like a royal headdress. Duke stood beside the half-collapsed gazebo, looking triumphant. Then came Karen's scream. She stormed toward the fence, her purple dress in tatters, hair full of grass, fingers shaking as she snarled, "You did this on purpose. You ruined everything." I walked down from the porch, calm as a sunrise. "Karen," I said, "I warned you this was an active pasture. You trespassed, built without permission. These are the consequences." Deputy Morrison returned, followed by 2 more sheriff's cars. Guests had called 911, claiming a bull attack. Karen demanded my arrest for unleashing dangerous animals. She shrieked about lawsuits and destroyed weddings. The deputy listened, then asked for my account. I showed him the signs, the photos, and my documentation. He turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, "this is criminal trespass and a code violation, and the property owner has every right to graze livestock on his land. You had no authority to use it." Karen's face drained to chalk. "But the wedding," she whispered. "Judge Weatherby's daughter should have thought about that before trespassing," the deputy replied. I agreed not to file charges on one condition: she had to remove the structure and repair every inch of damage. One of her board members, Janet, a reasonable soul, took Karen, stepped aside and whispered to her. Karen didn't argue again. The next morning, the crew arrived to dismantle the gazebo and clean up the mess. Duke and Diesel were reluctant to abandon their battlefield. By then, the video of the chaos titled Bulls Crash Texas Wedding had gone viral. Word spread fast in Meadowview. The emergency HOA meeting that Tuesday was packed. Judge Weatherby stormed in, furious, blaming Karen for everything. The HOA's insurance company had already called they were liable if I sued. Karen was voted out unanimously, but it didn't end there. The newlyweds sued Karen personally for wrecking their wedding. The caterer sued for damages. The musicians claimed emotional trauma. Even the photographer filed, claiming he now feared livestock. Total damages topped 200 grand. Karen settled quietly, draining her savings. Then the Bar Association opened an inquiry into her license. Turns out, claiming legal authority she never possessed wasn't a great career move. The last time I saw she was at the courthouse paying $25,000 in fines. Her proud strut was gone, replaced by a defeated shuffle. When she spotted me, she flushed scarlet, but said nothing. Justice doesn't always wear robes. Sometimes it comes with horns. If watching HOA arrogance get flattened by 2,000 pounds of Angus justice made your day, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more true tales where the good guys win. The Bulls hold the line, and karma always finds its way across the fence.